The dress had been mended so many times that the original fabric was barely visible beneath the patches. And when Margaret Whitmore stepped down from the stagecoach into the dusty afternoon heat of Granite, Colorado, in the summer of 1884, she knew every eye would judge her for it. She had traveled 300 miles from Kansas City with nothing but the clothes on her back, a battered carpet bag containing her mother's Bible and 2 changes of undergarments, and a letter promising her employment as a housekeeper at the Double E Ranch owned by one William Everett, a man she had never met, but who had responded to her advertisement in the Denver newspaper with surprising speed and what seemed like genuine kindness. The town of Granite sprawled across a valley between steep mountain slopes, its main street lined with false-fronted buildings that promised civilization while delivering something far more raw and unpredictable. Margaret stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the general store, clutching her carpet bag and trying not to notice the stares of passers-by. Her dress, once a respectable blue calico, now resembled a patchwork quilt of faded blues, grays, and even a bit of brown gingham she had salvaged from an old apron. She had done her best to keep it clean during the journey, but dust from the trail clung to the hem, and she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. "You waiting for someone, miss?" The voice belonged to an elderly man with a weathered face and kind eyes, sitting in a rocking chair outside the mercantile. "Yes, sir. I am supposed to meet someone from the Double E Ranch. Mr. Everett sent word that he would have someone collect me from town." The old man nodded slowly, his gaze flickering over her worn dress with neither scorn nor pity, just acknowledgement. "That would be Wade Everett's place. Fine rancher, that one. Lost his mother about a year back, and the place has been needing a woman's touch ever since. You the new housekeeper?" "I am, sir, Margaret Whitmore." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Whitmore. Name's Henry Clark. I run the livery down the street. Wade should be along shortly. He is a man of his word. Always has been." Margaret thanked him and settled onto a bench to wait, grateful for the shade provided by the mercantile's overhanging roof. The afternoon sun beat down on Granite with relentless intensity, and she could feel sweat beginning to dampen the back of her neck beneath her carefully pinned hair. She had tried to make herself presentable before arriving, braiding and coiling her dark brown hair into a neat bun, scrubbing her face and hands with water from her canteen, but she knew she looked tired and threadbare. The past 6 months had been the hardest of her 22 years of life. Her father had died of pneumonia in February, leaving behind debts that consumed everything the family owned. Her mother had followed him to the grave just 8 weeks later, her heart simply giving out from grief and exhaustion. Margaret had found herself alone in the world, with no relatives willing to take her in, and no prospects beyond the charity of the church, or an uncertain future as a seamstress earning barely enough to afford a single room in a boarding house. She had seen the advertisement section of the newspaper more as a lifeline than an opportunity, and when William Everett had written back within 2 weeks offering her steady employment, room and board, and a respectable wage, she had wept with relief. The sound of hoofbeats and wagon wheels drew her attention. A buckboard pulled by 2 sturdy horses came rolling down the main street, driven by a young man who looked to be in his middle 20s. He wore dusty work clothes, a well-worn hat, and moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. As he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the mercantile, Margaret noticed the way he sat tall in the seat, his broad shoulders squared, his sun-bronzed hands steady on the reins. "Miss Whitmore," he called out, securing the reins and climbing down from the wagon in one fluid motion. "Yes, that is me." Margaret stood, gripping her carpet bag. He strode toward her, and she found herself looking up into a face that was striking in its combination of strength and gentleness. His eyes were a clear gray blue, like the Colorado sky just before dawn, and they regarded her with an openness that was almost startling. He was clean-shaven, which was unusual for men in these parts, and she could see the strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at some point and healed slightly off-center. "I am Wade Everett. Welcome to Granite, Miss Whitmore. I apologize for keeping you waiting. We had a situation with one of the mares, and I could not leave until I was certain she was settled." "No apology necessary, Mr. Everett. I have not been waiting long." He reached for her carpet bag, and she handed it over, noting the calluses on his palms and the careful way he handled her meager belongings, as though they were something precious rather than practically worthless. He placed the bag in the back of the wagon with care, then turned to help her up onto the seat. His hand was warm and steady as she placed her own in it, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest that she attributed to nervousness about her new position. As Wade climbed up beside her and took the reins, she became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, their shoulders nearly touching on the narrow bench. He gave her a quick smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish, then clicked his tongue to set the horses moving. They rolled through town at an easy pace, passing the saloon, the hotel, the land office, and several other establishments that made up the heart of Granite's commercial district. "The ranch is about 5 miles out," Wade said, as they left the town behind and headed into open country. "We run cattle primarily, about 800 head right now, though I am hoping to expand in the next year or two. I have 6 men working for me, all good hands. They live in the bunkhouse on the property. The main house is where you will stay. I had my mother's old room prepared for you. It faces east, so you will get the morning sun, and there is a nice view of the mountains." "That sounds lovely, Mr. Everett. I appreciate you taking the time to arrange everything." "Please, call me Wade. We are not formal folks out here, and if you're going to be managing the household, we might as well be on comfortable terms." "Then you must call me Margaret." He nodded, and they fell into a companionable silence as the wagon rolled along the rutted road. The landscape around them was breathtaking in its stark beauty. The valley spread wide beneath endless blue sky, dotted with sage and scrub grass that had turned golden in the summer heat. In the distance, the Rocky Mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks still touched with snow even in July. Margaret had spent her entire life in Kansas City, surrounded by buildings and people and the constant noise of urban existence. This vast openness was both intimidating and oddly liberating. "Have you done this kind of work before?" Wade asked after a while, his tone conversational rather than interrogating. "I kept house for my parents," Margaret said carefully. "I can cook, clean, mend, and manage household accounts. My mother taught me everything she knew before she passed. I may not have formal employment references, but I promise you I am a hard worker, and I will do everything in my power to meet your expectations." Wade glanced at her, and she saw something like understanding in his eyes. "I read between the lines of your letter. I am sorry for your losses. Losing both parents in such a short time, that is a heavy burden to bear." The unexpected sympathy nearly undid her composure. She had been bracing herself for judgment, for skepticism, for the kind of cold transaction that defined most employer-employee relationships. Instead, this man she had known for less than half an hour was offering her genuine compassion. "Thank you," she managed. "It has been difficult, but I am grateful for this opportunity. You have given me a chance when many others would not have." "Everyone deserves a chance, Margaret. Besides, I have a good feeling about you. My mother always said to trust your instincts about people, and my instincts say you are exactly what the Double E needs." They crested a low rise, and suddenly the ranch spread out before them. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built from local timber and stone, with a wide front porch and windows that gleamed in the afternoon light. Nearby stood a large barn, several outbuildings, corrals containing horses and cattle, and a long, low building that must be the bunkhouse. Everything looked well-maintained and prosperous, the result of years of hard work and careful stewardship. As Wade drove the wagon into the yard, Margaret saw several men lounging near the barn, taking a break from their labors. They turned to watch as the wagon approached, their faces curious. Wade pulled the horses to a stop near the front porch and climbed down, then came around to help Margaret descend. She was acutely conscious of her appearance as she stepped down from the wagon, knowing that the ranch hands were assessing her, forming their first impressions. She held her head high and tried to project a confidence she did not entirely feel. Wade retrieved her carpet bag from the back of the wagon, and as they started toward the house, one of the men called out, "That is the new housekeeper, boss? Looks like she is wearing her grandmother's quilt." Laughter erupted from the group of men, harsh and mocking. Margaret felt heat flood her face, but she kept walking, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing how deeply their words cut. Beside her, Wade had gone very still. He set her carpetbag down on the porch steps with deliberate care, then turned to face the men. "What did you just say, Collins?" His voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the softness. The man who had spoken, a lanky fellow with a scraggly beard and mean eyes, grinned insolently. "Just making an observation, boss. We were wondering if you hired a housekeeper or a scarecrow." More laughter followed. There were 5 men in the group, all of them clearly enjoying what they perceived as harmless entertainment at Margaret's expense. She stood frozen on the porch steps, humiliation burning through her veins. She wanted to defend herself, to tell them that she had done the best she could with what little she had, that poverty was not a moral failing, that their cruelty said far more about them than it did about her. But her throat had closed up, and no words would come. Wade walked toward the group with measured steps. Everything about his posture had changed. The easygoing rancher who had conversed so pleasantly during their drive had been replaced by something harder, more dangerous. The men seemed to sense the shift, their laughter dying away as Wade approached. "Let me make something very clear," Wade said, his voice carrying across the yard despite its lack of volume. "Miss Whitmore is an employee of this ranch, same as any of you. She will be treated with respect and courtesy at all times. What she wears is none of your concern, and any man who thinks it is funny to mock a woman for circumstances beyond her control is not a man I want working for me." Collins had the sense to look uncertain now, but he was not smart enough to back down completely. "Oh, come on, boss. We were just having a bit of fun. No harm meant." "No harm meant?" Wade repeated. "You deliberately humiliated a woman on her first day here, in front of everyone, and you think that is harmless fun. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, Collins, and I do not like what it says." "You cannot be serious," another man said, stepping forward. This one was stockier, older, with graying hair and a face weathered by years of outdoor work. "We have been riding for you for 3 years, Wade. You are going to take the side of some woman we have never met over your own crew?" "I am taking the side of common decency, Harris, something you should have learned a long time ago. And yes, I am absolutely serious. All 5 of you are fired. I want you off my property by sunset. You will be paid through today, but that is it. Gather your things and get out." Stunned silence followed this pronouncement. Margaret stood on the porch, hardly daring to breathe. She had never seen anyone defend her like this, had never witnessed someone willing to sacrifice their own convenience and comfort for the sake of basic human dignity. Part of her wanted to tell Wade that it was not necessary, that she could endure worse than a few cruel words, but another part of her, a deeper and more fundamental part, was fiercely glad that someone had finally stood up for her. "You are making a mistake," Collins said, his face flushing with anger. "We know this ranch inside and out. You need us. I need men I can trust to do right by everyone on this property, not bullies who get their kicks from making others feel small. I will manage just fine without you. Now get moving." The 5 men exchanged glances, clearly debating whether to argue further, but something in Wade's stance told them it would be pointless. They began moving toward the bunkhouse, muttering among themselves. Wade watched them go, his expression unreadable, then turned and walked back to where Margaret stood. "I apologize for that," he said, picking up her carpetbag once more. "You should never have been subjected to such treatment. Those men are gone, and they will not bother you again." Margaret found her voice at last, though it emerged shakier than she would have liked. "You did not have to fire them on my account. I have dealt with worse. That may be true, but you will not deal with it here. Not on my ranch, not under my roof. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity, and I will not employ anyone who thinks otherwise." He met her eyes, and she saw absolute certainty there. "Come on, let me show you to your room. You have had a long journey, and you should rest before dinner." He led her into the house, and Margaret's first impression was of solid comfort rather than luxury. The front door opened into a spacious parlor with well-worn but good furniture, braided rugs on the polished wood floors, and curtains framing the windows. Everything was clean, but had the slight air of neglect that comes when a house lacks a woman's regular attention. There was dust on the mantelpiece, and the curtains needed washing, and she could see scuff marks on the floor that needed addressing. Wade carried her bag up a flight of stairs to the second floor and down a hallway to a corner room. When he opened the door, Margaret could not suppress a small gasp of delight. The room was beautiful, far nicer than anything she had expected. A large brass bed stood against one wall, covered with a colorful quilt. A dresser with a mirror occupied another wall, and there was even a small writing desk beneath the east-facing window. True to Wade's word, the view was spectacular, offering a sweeping vista of mountains and valley. "This was my mother's room," Wade said, setting her bag on the bed. "After she passed, I could not bring myself to change anything. It felt wrong somehow, but I think she would be happy knowing someone was using it again, especially someone who needed a place to call home. It is more than I could have hoped for, Margaret said honestly. Thank you, Wade, for everything, for the job, for this beautiful room, for what you did out there. I do not know what to say. You do not need to say anything. Just make yourself at home. Take your time settling in. Dinner is usually around 6. I am not much of a cook, so I have been making do with simple things. But starting tomorrow, the kitchen is yours to command. He left her then, closing the door quietly behind him. Margaret sank down onto the bed, her hands trembling slightly. The events of the past hour had been overwhelming in the extreme. She had arrived expecting at best polite tolerance and at worst outright hostility. Instead, she had found a man who defended her without hesitation, who valued her dignity more than the convenience of keeping experienced ranch hands, who spoke to her as though she were a person of worth rather than a desperate woman grateful for any scrap of charity. She thought about the way Wade's eyes had hardened when those men laughed at her, the way he had walked toward them with such purpose, the absolute conviction in his voice when he fired them. No one had ever stood up for her like that. Her parents had loved her, certainly, but they had been gentle people, conflict-averse, the kind who taught her to keep her head down and accept whatever life threw at her with grace and silence. Wade Everett was something entirely different. Margaret rose and unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the wardrobe and placing her undergarments in the dresser. The room seemed to swallow her possessions, making the emptiness of the other drawers and wardrobe space all the more apparent. She took out her mother's Bible and placed it on the bedside table, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. Then she poured water from the pitcher on the dresser into the basin and washed her face and hands, marveling at the simple luxury of having such amenities in her own private room. By the time she made her way downstairs an hour later, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. She found Wade in the kitchen, attempting to put together what looked like a meal of fried potatoes and bacon. He glanced up when she entered, and she saw relief cross his face. "I was starting to worry I would have to serve you burnt potatoes on your first night," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "I was not exaggerating when I said I am not much of a cook." "Let me," Margaret said, moving to the stove. "You have done enough for one day." She took over the cooking, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she salvaged the potatoes and finished preparing the bacon. She found eggs in the cold cellar and scrambled them with a bit of cream she discovered in a crock. There were onions hanging in the pantry, and she diced some to add flavor to the potatoes. Within 20 minutes, she had put together a simple but satisfying meal. They ate at the kitchen table, just the 2 of them, and Margaret found the experience oddly intimate. Wade told her about the ranch, about his plans for expansion, about the challenges of running a cattle operation in this rugged country. She listened, asking questions when appropriate, gradually relaxing in his presence. He had a way of talking that made her feel included, as though her opinions mattered, as though they were partners in this endeavor rather than employer and employee. "What happened to your other ranch hand?" Margaret asked. "You said you had 6 men working for you, but only 5 were fired." "Jake Thornton is up in the north pasture checking on the herd. He is staying out overnight. I sent him up there this morning before I went to town. He is a good man, solid worker, and he treats everyone with respect. I have no concerns about him, but losing 5 men all at once, that is going to create some challenges. I will need to hire replacements, but good hands are hard to find, and it may take some time. I am sorry to have caused you such trouble on my very first day." Wade set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Margaret, you caused nothing. Those men caused the trouble with their cruelty and their lack of character. Do not take responsibility for other people's failings. That is a road that leads nowhere good." His words struck something deep within her. How many times had she blamed herself for circumstances beyond her control? How often had she internalized the judgment of others, accepting their assessment of her worth as truth rather than recognizing it as their own limitation? Wade's simple statement felt revolutionary. They finished dinner, and Margaret insisted on cleaning up despite Wade's protests that she should rest on her first evening. The truth was that she needed something to do with her hands, some familiar task to ground her after the emotional upheaval of the day. Wade eventually gave up arguing and went outside to check on the horses, leaving her alone in the kitchen. As she washed dishes and tidied up, Margaret found herself thinking about the man who had hired her. Wade Everett was not what she had expected. She had anticipated someone older, harder, more like the rough ranchers she had seen in town. Instead, she had found someone young, principled, and surprisingly kind. He was handsome too, though she tried not to dwell on that fact. She was here to work, to earn her keep and rebuild her life. Developing feelings for her employer would be foolish beyond measure. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Margaret woke early, prepared breakfast for Wade and Jake, who had returned from the north pasture, and greeted her with friendly courtesy. She spent her days cleaning the house from top to bottom, washing curtains and windows, scrubbing floors, beating rugs, and putting everything in order. The work was hard but satisfying, and she took genuine pride in watching the house transform under her care. Wade was gone much of the time, working alongside Jake to manage the ranch duties that normally required 6 men. They came in for meals exhausted and covered in dust, grateful for the hot food Margaret prepared. She had discovered that the pantry and cold cellar were well stocked, and she put her skills to good use, making hearty stews, fresh bread, pies from the preserved fruit she found stored away, and other substantial meals designed to sustain men doing hard physical labor. In the evenings after Jake had retired to the bunkhouse, Wade and Margaret often found themselves sitting on the front porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on this ranch, about his father, who had died when Wade was 19, about his mother, who had held everything together for 5 more years before her own death. Margaret shared stories about her childhood in Kansas City, about her parents, about the life she had lost and was trying to rebuild. A week after her arrival, Wade returned from town with a package wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to Margaret with an almost shy expression. "I hope you do not mind. I know it is not really my place, but I thought you might find this useful." Margaret unwrapped the package to find fabric, beautiful high-quality fabric in a deep green color that would suit her complexion perfectly. There was enough for at least 2 dresses, along with thread, buttons, and even some delicate lace trim. "Wade, I cannot accept this," she said, though her fingers had already moved to touch the material, feeling its smoothness. "This must have cost a fortune." "Consider it a work necessity," he said, looking uncomfortable but determined. "You need proper clothing to do your job, and I should have thought of it sooner. Besides, my mother's sewing machine is sitting unused upstairs in the spare room. She would have wanted it to be put to good use." Margaret felt tears prickling at her eyes. The gift was generous beyond measure, but even more touching was the way he had framed it, allowing her to accept without feeling like she was taking charity. "Thank you. I do not know what else to say, except thank you." "You are welcome. I look forward to seeing what you create." That evening, Margaret explored the spare room and found the sewing machine Wade had mentioned, along with boxes of patterns, notions, and other supplies his mother had collected over the years. She set to work immediately, cutting and stitching late into the night. Sewing had always been meditative for her, a way to quiet her mind and focus on something concrete and creative. The green fabric transformed under her hands into a practical day dress with a fitted bodice, long sleeves, and a full skirt that would be suitable for her work around the ranch. She made a second dress from the remaining fabric, this one slightly finer, something she could wear to church if she ever had the opportunity to attend services in town. When she finally finished both garments 3 days later, she felt a surge of pride. The dresses fit her perfectly, and the quality of the fabric made her look and feel like a different person. She was no longer the desperate woman in the patched and worn-out dress. She was someone who belonged here, someone with dignity and purpose. The first time Margaret came down to breakfast wearing one of her new dresses, the look on Wade's face made her heart skip several beats. He stared at her for a long moment, something like wonder in his eyes, before he seemed to catch himself and looked away, a faint flush coloring his tanned cheeks. "That turned out beautifully," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "The color suits you." "Thank you for making it possible," Margaret replied, suddenly feeling shy under his gaze. Jake, who had witnessed this exchange with barely concealed amusement, cleared his throat. "If you two are done admiring each other, I believe breakfast is getting cold." They both laughed, breaking the tension, but Margaret noticed that Wade's eyes kept drifting back to her throughout the meal. Something was shifting between them, something that went beyond employer and employee, beyond simple friendship. She could feel it in the air like an electrical charge before a storm, both thrilling and terrifying. 2 weeks after Margaret's arrival, Wade rode into town to place advertisements for new ranch hands. He returned late in the afternoon looking frustrated. "Every decent hand in the territory is already employed," he told Margaret as she served him coffee in the kitchen. "I am going to have to cast a wider net, maybe reach out to employment agencies in Denver. In the meantime, Jake and I are stretched thin. I might need to hire some temporary help just to get us through the next month." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Margaret asked. Wade smiled at her. "You are already doing more than I could have hoped. The house has never looked better, and coming home to your cooking after a long day, that makes everything bearable. But I appreciate the offer." Over the following weeks, Margaret settled more deeply into life at the Double E Ranch. She established routines for laundry, baking, cleaning, and meal preparation. She began keeping chickens, something Wade's mother had apparently done before her health declined, and she started a small vegetable garden near the kitchen door, planting seeds she found stored in the pantry. The physical work was demanding, but she thrived on it, feeling stronger and healthier than she had in years. Wade did manage to hire 2 temporary workers, drifters passing through who were willing to work for a few weeks. They were competent enough, but clearly not planning to stay long term. Still, their presence eased some of the burden on Wade and Jake, and Margaret noticed that Wade seemed less exhausted when he came in for meals. One evening in early August, a massive thunderstorm rolled through the valley. Margaret had been preparing dinner when the first crack of thunder shook the house, followed by a deluge of rain so intense she could barely see the barn through the kitchen window. Wade and the other men came running in from various parts of the ranch, soaked to the skin despite their oilskin coats. "That came on fast," Wade said, stripping off his wet coat and hanging it by the door. Water dripped from his hair and ran down his face, and Margaret had to resist the urge to reach out and wipe it away. "We managed to get most of the horses into the barn, but there are still some cattle out in the open pasture. Nothing to be done about it now, except wait out the storm and check for damage in the morning." The storm raged for hours, lightning splitting the sky and thunder rattling the windows. The temporary workers and Jake had retreated to the bunkhouse after dinner, but Wade lingered in the parlor, standing at the window and watching the storm with a concerned expression. Margaret brought him coffee and stood beside him, drawn by something she could not quite name. "Beautiful and terrifying at the same time," she murmured, watching the lightning illuminate the mountains in stark relief. "Like most things worth experiencing," Wade replied. He turned to look at her, and in the flickering light from the fireplace, his face seemed carved from stone and shadow. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy here? I know the work is hard, and the isolation must be difficult compared to what you were used to in Kansas City. If you are unhappy, if you want to leave, I will understand. I will make sure you have the means to go wherever you wish." The question caught her off guard. Happy? She had not thought about happiness in so long, had become so focused on mere survival that the concept seemed almost foreign. But now, standing in this warm house with rain pounding against the windows, and this good man looking at her with genuine concern in his eyes, she realized that, yes, she was happy. More than happy. She was content in a way she had never been before, even in the best days with her parents. "I am happy," she said softly. "Happier than I have been in a very long time. I do not want to leave, Wade, not unless you want me to go." "I do not want you to go." His voice was quiet but intense. "I cannot imagine this place without you now. You have brought life back to this house, warmth I did not realize I was missing. I look forward to coming home now, knowing you will be here. I wake up looking forward to breakfast because it means I will see you. And that probably sounds inappropriate given that I am your employer, and I apologize if I have overstepped, but I cannot keep pretending that you are just my housekeeper. You are more than that. At least, you are to me." Margaret's heart was pounding so hard, she was certain he must hear it. "You have not overstepped. I feel the same way. I tried not to. Tried to tell myself it was foolish and inappropriate, but I cannot help it. When you defended me that first day, when you stood up for me without hesitation, something changed inside me. No one has ever made me feel the way you do. Valued, protected, seen." Wade reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "You are all of those things. valued and precious and absolutely beautiful. I have been half in love with you since you stepped off that stagecoach, and I am done fighting it." "Then do not fight it," Margaret whispered. "Please do not fight it." He kissed her then, softly at first, tentatively, as though she were something fragile that might break under too much pressure. But when she responded, when her hands came up to rest on his chest and she leaned into the kiss, he deepened it, pulling her closer until she was pressed against him, feeling the solid strength of his body and the rapid beating of his heart under her palms. The storm raged outside, but inside the house there was only warmth and connection and the overwhelming rightness of being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right, not rush into anything just because we are living under the same roof and spending every day together. You deserve to be courted and cherished, not just swept into something because of proximity and convenience." "We are a bit beyond conventional courtship at this point," Margaret said with a shaky laugh. "But I appreciate the sentiment. Yes, Wade, I would like that very much." They spent the rest of the evening sitting together on the sofa, Margaret tucked against Wade's side, his arm around her shoulders. They talked about their hopes and dreams, about what they wanted from life, about the possibility of a future together. It was the most natural thing in the world, and yet it felt momentous, as though they were standing at the edge of something vast and important. The following weeks were the happiest of Margaret's life. Wade courted her with old-fashioned dedication, bringing her wildflowers. He picked on his rides around the ranch, sitting with her in the evenings and reading aloud from books they both enjoyed, finding small ways to make her smile throughout each day. They continued to maintain propriety, mindful of appearances even though there were few people around to observe them, but the connection between them deepened with each passing day. In mid-August, Wade finally succeeded in hiring 3 new permanent ranch hands through an employment agency in Denver. The men arrived on a Tuesday morning, their belongings packed on their horses, their attitudes respectful and professional. Wade introduced them to Margaret formally, making it clear from the outset that she was to be treated with courtesy and respect. The men, perhaps sensing what had happened to their predecessors, were unfailingly polite. With the ranch fully staffed again, some of the pressure eased. Wade had more time to spend with Margaret, and they made the most of it. He taught her to ride, putting her on the gentlest mare in his string and leading her around the corrals until she gained confidence. She proved to be a natural, and within a week she was riding well enough that Wade felt comfortable taking her out on short excursions around the ranch property. They rode up into the foothills one Sunday afternoon, following a narrow trail that climbed through stands of aspen and pine. The air was cooler at the higher elevation, crisp and clean, scented with evergreen. They stopped at a high meadow that offered spectacular views of the valley below, and Wade helped Margaret dismount, his hands lingering at her waist, perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I used to come up here when I was younger," Wade said, standing beside her and gazing out at the panorama. "Whenever I needed to think or just wanted to be alone with my thoughts. My father showed me this spot. He said it was important to have a place where you could see the bigger picture, where the daily struggles and problems seem smaller in comparison to the vastness of the world." "It is breathtaking," Margaret said. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Wade turned to face her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "Margaret, I know we have not been courting for very long by conventional standards, but nothing about our situation has been conventional from the start. I love you. I think I have loved you from the moment you stood on that porch, refusing to let those men see how much their words hurt you. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you have brought warmth back into my home and my life. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you will have me." He dropped to one knee in the wildflower-strewn meadow, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band set with a small diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight and threw sparkles across the grass. "Will you marry me, Margaret? Will you be my wife?" Tears were streaming down Margaret's face, but they were tears of pure joy. "Yes. Yes, Wade, I will marry you. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both laughing and breathless. Then he kissed her, deep and passionate, a kiss that promised forever. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Wade explained that it had belonged to his grandmother, that his mother had given it to him years ago with the instruction that he should only give it to a woman he loved with his whole heart. "She would have loved you," Wade said softly. "My mother, I mean. She would have loved your spirit and your good heart. I wish she could have met you. I wish I could have met her too, but I will honor her memory by taking care of you and this place she loved so much." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, their hands linked whenever the trail was wide enough to ride side by side. That night, they announced their engagement to Jake and the other ranch hands over dinner. The men offered congratulations and good-natured teasing, and Jake pulled Wade aside afterward to shake his hand and tell him he had chosen well. They decided to have a simple ceremony in early September, giving them just enough time to make the necessary arrangements. Margaret wanted to be married in Granite's small church, and Wade agreed. He went into town to speak with the minister and arrange the details while Margaret began preparing for the wedding with the limited resources available to her. The women of Granite, upon hearing that Wade Everett was getting married, descended upon the ranch with surprising enthusiasm. Mrs. Clark, the wife of the livery owner who had greeted Margaret on her first day, took charge of organizing a small reception. Others offered to help with decorations, food, and other necessities. Margaret was overwhelmed by their generosity, by their willingness to welcome her into their community, despite her status as an outsider. Wade insisted on taking Margaret to the dressmaker in town to order a proper wedding dress, something she could not have afforded on her own. The dressmaker, a skilled woman named Mrs. Patterson, designed a beautiful gown in ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Margaret stood for fittings and watched in wonder as the dress took shape, hardly able to believe that this elegant garment was being made for her. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity and anticipation. Margaret continued her household duties, but now she did them with an extra lightness in her step, humming as she worked. Wade seemed equally happy, whistling as he went about his ranch work, often stealing moments to pull Margaret aside for quick kisses when no one was watching. The night before the wedding, Wade moved into the bunkhouse to observe propriety, much to the amusement of his ranch hands. Margaret spent the evening with Mrs. Clark and several other women from town who had come to help her prepare. They fussed over her hair, gave her advice about married life with a frankness that made her blush, and generally treated her with the warmth and acceptance she had been craving since losing her own mother. The morning of her wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect early September day, with just a hint of autumn crispness in the air. Margaret woke early in the room that had been hers for nearly 3 months, looking around at the space that had become her sanctuary. After today, she would be moving into Wade's room, the master bedroom that had belonged to his parents. They had already discussed it, and Wade had been making preparations, bringing in new furniture, and even painting the walls at Margaret's suggestion. Mrs. Clark and the other women arrived mid-morning to help Margaret dress. The ivory silk gown fit her perfectly, transforming her into someone she barely recognized in the mirror. Her dark hair had been swept up into an elaborate style, with small wildflowers tucked into the curls. She looked beautiful, elegant, nothing like the worn and desperate woman who had stepped off the stagecoach wearing a dress more patches than original fabric. The church in Granite was small but charming, with rough-hewn wooden pews and simple stained glass windows that cast colored light across the floor. It was packed with people, far more than Margaret had expected. Apparently, the entire town had turned out to witness Wade Everett's marriage. She stood at the back of the church, her arm linked through Jake's. Wade had asked his foreman to give the bride away, and Jake had accepted the honor with gruff pleasure. Then the small organ began playing, and everyone stood, turning to watch as Margaret began her walk down the aisle. But she had eyes only for Wade, standing at the front of the church in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his face shining with such open love and happiness that she felt her own eyes fill with tears. This was real. This was happening. This good, honorable man was about to become her husband. The ceremony itself passed in a haze of emotion. Margaret heard herself making her vows, her voice steady despite the overwhelming feelings coursing through her. She heard Wade's voice, strong and clear, promising to love and cherish her for all the days of his life. She felt him slip the wedding band onto her finger, joining the engagement ring already there. And then the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Wade was kissing her, while the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the town hall, a simple but joyful affair, with food provided by what seemed like every woman in Granite. There was music and dancing, and Margaret found herself swept from partner to partner as the townsfolk insisted on celebrating with the newlyweds. But it was her dance with Wade that she would remember forever, the way he held her close and looked into her eyes as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "Happy, Mrs. Everett?" he murmured into her ear. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she replied honestly. They left the reception in late afternoon, riding back to the ranch in the wagon, decorated with ribbons and tin cans by well-meaning friends. The ranch hands had made themselves scarce, giving the newlyweds privacy on their wedding night. Wade carried Margaret over the threshold of their home, and she laughed with pure joy, her arms around his neck, feeling safe and loved and complete. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Wade made love to his wife with tenderness and passion, and Margaret discovered depths of feeling and connection she had never imagined. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her to this moment. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "How different my life is now compared to 6 months ago. If someone had told me then that I would be married to a wonderful man, living on a beautiful ranch, happier than I have ever been, I would not have believed them. I was so lost, Wade, so alone and frightened. And then you gave me a chance. You gave yourself a chance by being brave enough to come out here, by being willing to start over in a strange place with no guarantees. All I did was recognize something special when I saw it. You did more than that. You defended me when I could not defend myself. You saw my worth when others only saw my worn dress and lack of connections. You changed my life, Wade Everett, in the best possible way." "Then we changed each other's lives," Wade said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Because you brought light back into my world, Margaret. After my mother died, this place felt empty, like just going through the motions. You made it a home again." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Margaret's last thought before drifting off was that she had finally found where she belonged. The months that followed were filled with work and love, and the steady building of a life together. Margaret thrived as Wade's wife, managing the household with skill and efficiency, while also finding ways to contribute to the ranch operations. She began keeping detailed records of expenses and income, discovering she had a head for numbers that proved invaluable. Wade started consulting her on business decisions, valuing her input and perspective. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Wade expanded the herd as planned, and prices for cattle were good that year. They began making improvements to the property, building a new barn and expanding the bunkhouse to accommodate additional workers. Margaret used some of their profits to add touches of comfort and beauty to the house, ordering furniture from a catalog, hanging new curtains, and generally making the place reflect their combined personality and style. Winter arrived in November, blanketing the valley in snow and transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and harsh. Margaret experienced her first mountain winter with a mixture of awe and occasional frustration at being confined to the house during the worst storms. But she kept busy, sewing clothes for herself and Wade, reading from the small library Wade's mother had accumulated, and experimenting with new recipes. On Christmas morning, Margaret woke to find Wade watching her with an expression of barely contained excitement. "What?" she asked, laughing at his obvious anticipation. "I have something to tell you, but I want to do it properly. Come downstairs." She pulled on her robe and followed him down to the parlor, where a fire was already crackling in the hearth. Under the small evergreen tree they had decorated together sat several wrapped packages. Wade handed her one, and when she opened it, she found a beautiful leather-bound journal. "I thought you might want to record our story," Wade said, "so our children and grandchildren will know how we met, how we fell in love, how their mother was the bravest, most beautiful woman I ever knew." "Our children," Margaret repeated softly, a smile spreading across her face. She placed her hand on her still flat stomach. "Speaking of which, I believe I have news of my own. I was going to tell you on Christmas anyway, but this seems like the perfect moment. We are going to have a baby, Wade. I'm about 2 months along." The joy that flooded Wade's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. He pulled Margaret into his arms, holding her with infinite care, as though she had suddenly become even more precious and fragile. "A baby! We are going to be parents. Margaret, That is the best Christmas present I could ever receive." They spent the rest of the day in quiet celebration, just the two of them, planning and dreaming about the child who would arrive in late spring. Wade was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting that Margaret rest more, do less heavy work, take better care of herself. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love and concern. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Margaret continued to manage the household, though she did accept more help from Wade, and occasionally from the ranch hands when heavy tasks needed doing. Her body changed, her belly growing round with their child, and Wade seemed to find her even more beautiful in this state, constantly touching her stomach and talking to the baby as though it could already hear him. In early April, Margaret felt the first labor pains. Wade rode to town at breakneck speed to fetch the doctor and the midwife, his face pale with worry. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following afternoon. But finally, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a strong set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. They named him Thomas William Everett, after both his grandfathers. Wade held his son with tears streaming down his face, looking at Margaret with such profound love and gratitude that she felt her heart might burst. "You are amazing," he whispered. "Absolutely amazing. Thank you for this gift, Margaret. Thank you for our son." Thomas became the center of their world. Wade proved to be a devoted father, doting on the baby and helping with his care despite the demands of running the ranch. Margaret adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, though she admitted to Wade during a particularly exhausting night of soothing a crying baby that nothing could have fully prepared her for this experience. As Thomas grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Wade hired more men and expanded operations further. They built a new house for Jake, who had proven himself indispensable over the years and deserved better than the bunkhouse. Margaret started a small business selling eggs and vegetables to families in town, using the income to fund her personal projects and to help support the church and charitable causes in Granite. 2 years after Thomas was born, Margaret gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline Rose. Then, 3 years later, another son named James. The house that had once seemed so empty filled with the noise and chaos and joy of children. Margaret often thought back to that first day when she had arrived wearing a dress more patches than fabric, humiliated and uncertain, and marveled at how far she had come. One evening, when Thomas was 7, Caroline was 5, and James was 2, the family sat together on the front porch watching the sunset. Thomas was showing his father a picture he had drawn. Caroline was singing a song she had learned, and James was toddling around collecting interesting rocks to show his mother. Margaret sat in her rocking chair with her mending, occasionally glancing up to smile at the scene before her. Wade caught her eye and smiled back, and in that smile was everything they had built together. Love, partnership, family, home, all the things that had seemed impossibly far away on that hot afternoon in July 7 years ago, when she had stood in the dusty street of Granite wondering if she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked, settling into the chair beside hers after helping Caroline climb into his lap. "About how blessed we are, about how grateful I am for everything we have built together, about how that first day, when those men laughed at my dress and you defended me, you changed the entire course of my life. We changed each other's lives," Wade corrected gently, echoing what he had said on their wedding night. "I was just existing before you came, Margaret, going through the motions. You taught me how to truly live again." Thomas looked up from his drawing. "Mama, why were men laughing at your dress?" Margaret exchanged a glance with Wade, then decided her son was old enough to hear the truth. "When I first came here, I was very poor. The only dress I had was old and patched, and some of the men who worked for your father thought it was funny to make fun of me for it. But your father stood up for me. He fired those men and made sure I knew that I was valued and respected, no matter what I was wearing. That was not nice of them," Caroline said solemnly. "Making fun of people is mean." "You are absolutely right, sweetheart," Wade said, kissing the top of her head. "That is why we always treat everyone with kindness and respect, no matter what they look like or where they come from." As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge in the vast Colorado sky, the family moved inside for dinner. The kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the smell of the stew Margaret had prepared earlier. They sat around the table together, hands joined as Wade said, "Grace," thanking God for the food, for their family, for the many blessings they had been given. After the children were bathed and tucked into bed, Wade and Margaret sat together in the parlor, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. The house was quiet now, except for the crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of settling timber. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked suddenly. "Coming out here, marrying a rancher, living this life. I know it is not easy, and you could have had something different if you had stayed in Kansas City or gone somewhere else." Margaret lifted her head to look at him, cupping his face in her hand. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I am meant to be, Wade. With you, with our children, on this land. I have everything I ever wanted, even things I did not know I wanted until I found them. You are my home." Wade kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that spoke of enduring love and unshakable commitment. "And you are mine. Always." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the steady rhythms of ranch life. Thomas grew tall and strong, learning the work of cattle and horses from his father, and developing into a fine young man. Caroline proved to have her mother's head for numbers and her father's love of the land, often riding out with Wade to check on the herds. James, the youngest, was gentle and thoughtful, showing an early interest in books and learning that delighted both his parents. Margaret and Wade grew older together, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. They faced challenges, as all marriages do. There were drought years when the grass grew sparse and they had to make difficult decisions about the herd. There were illnesses and injuries, moments of fear and uncertainty. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and from the solid foundation they had built. Jake eventually married a widow from town and brought her to live in his house on the ranch property. The two couples became close friends, often sharing meals and celebrating holidays together. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Wade's reputation for fair dealing and good business practices spread, and the Double E brand became synonymous with quality cattle. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Wade took Margaret back up to the high meadow where he had proposed. They were both grayer now, their faces marked by time and weather, but their hands still fit together perfectly as they stood looking out over the valley. "Do you remember what I said to you here?" Wade asked. "Every word. You said you loved me and wanted to spend the rest of your life with me." "I still mean it. Every single word. 20 years, 3 children, countless sunsets and storms and ordinary moments, and I love you more now than I did then. You are still the bravest, most beautiful woman I know." Margaret turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "And you are still the most honorable, kind, and loving man I have ever known. You saw me when I was at my lowest point and treated me with dignity. You gave me not just a job or a home, but a chance to be truly happy. I will love you for the rest of my days, Wade Everett, and beyond if such things are possible." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of the pink and gold. Then they rode back down to the ranch, to the home they had built, to the life they had created together from almost nothing. Margaret lived to see all 3 of her children grow up, marry, and have children of their own. Thomas took over the day-to-day running of the ranch as Wade grew older, proving himself a worthy successor. Caroline married a banker from Denver, but stayed close to her family, visiting often with her own children. James became a teacher in Granite, educating the town's children and earning the respect of the entire community. Wade and Margaret grew old together in the house where they had fallen in love, surrounded by children and grandchildren, their lives a testament to the power of compassion, dignity, and love. They often told the story of how they met, about the worn-out dress and the ranch hands who had laughed, and the young rancher who had defended a stranger because it was the right thing to do. "Everything changed that day," Margaret would say, holding Wade's hand as they sat on their porch, watching yet another sunset over the Colorado mountains. "One moment of kindness changed everything." "It was not kindness," Wade always replied. "It was recognition. I recognized something precious when I saw it, and I was not about to let anyone treat you with anything less than the respect you deserved." On a warm spring evening, many years after that first meeting, Margaret sat on the porch with her eldest grandchild, a girl of 12 named Emily. The girl was troubled about something, and Margaret listened patiently as she explained that some children at school had had been making fun of her for wearing hand-me-down clothes. "Let me tell you a story," Margaret said, pulling the girl close. "When I first came to this ranch, I was wearing a dress so patched and worn that grown men laughed at me. I was so embarrassed, so humiliated. But your grandfather did something that changed my life. He stood up for me. He showed me that my worth was not determined by my clothes or my circumstances, but by who I was as a person. And he taught me that the people who mock others for things beyond their control are revealing their own lack of character, not yours." "What did you do?" Emily asked. "I held my head high. I worked hard. I proved my worth through my actions, not my appearance, and I found happiness beyond anything I could have imagined, all because I refused to let other people's cruelty define me." Emily hugged her grandmother tightly. "Thank you, Grandma. I will try to remember that." Margaret smiled, stroking the girl's hair, seeing in her the same strength and determination that had carried herself through those difficult early days. The cycle continued, each generation learning from the last, carrying forward the lessons of dignity, respect, and enduring love. Wade joined them on the porch, moving more slowly now in his 70s, but still vital and engaged. He settled into his favorite chair with a contented sigh, reaching out to take Margaret's hand as he always did. Their fingers interlaced automatically, a gesture so familiar after decades of marriage that it required no thought. "Beautiful evening," he commented, looking out over the ranch that had been his life's work. "Every evening is beautiful when you are here," Margaret replied, squeezing his hand. They sat together as the sun set, 3 generations united by love and shared history, the ranch spreading out before them like a promise fulfilled. The house that had once been empty now rang with life and laughter. The land that Wade had inherited and built upon now supported not just his own family, but several others who worked the expanded operation. And at the center of it all was the love story that had begun with a worn-out dress and a man courageous enough to defend a stranger. Margaret's health began to decline when she was in her late 70s. It happened gradually, a slow dimming rather than a sudden extinguishing. Wade cared for her with the same devotion he had shown throughout their marriage, rarely leaving her side, reading to her, holding her hand, reminding her every day how much he loved her. On a quiet afternoon in early autumn, with golden aspen leaves drifting past the windows and the mountains standing eternal against the sky, Margaret lay in their bed, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Wade sat beside her, his hand clasping hers, his eyes never leaving her face. "It has been a wonderful life," Margaret whispered, her voice weak but clear. "No regrets, only gratitude." "You made it wonderful," Wade replied, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "You made everything better just by being in it." "Love you," she breathed. "Always." "Always," he echoed. Margaret Whitmore Everett passed away peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by the love she had spent a lifetime building. Wade held her hand long after she was gone, unable to let go of the woman who had been his partner, his love, his everything for more than 50 years. He lived 3 more years after her death, years filled with the support of his children and the comfort of memories. He often sat on the porch in the evenings, talking to Margaret as though she were still beside him, telling her about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the ranch, about the 100 small details of daily life she had always cared about. When Wade finally passed away, quiet and calm in his sleep, the entire town of Granite mourned. They buried him beside Margaret in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could rest together beneath the endless sky they had both loved. Their children ensured that the ranch stayed in the family, that the legacy Margaret and Wade had built together continued for future generations. The story of how they met, how they fell in love, became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The worn-out dress that had started it all, carefully preserved by Margaret throughout her life, was eventually donated to the local historical society, where it hung in a place of honor with a placard telling its story. Visitors would read about the woman who arrived in Granite with nothing but courage and determination, about the rancher who recognized her worth when others saw only poverty, about the love that transformed both their lives. And in the house on the Double E Ranch, now occupied by Thomas and his family, a leather-bound journal sat on a shelf in the library. Inside, written in Margaret's careful hand, was the complete story of her life with Wade. The journal began with these words: "I arrived in Granite, Colorado on a hot July day in 1884, wearing a dress so patched and worn that ranch hands laughed at me. But one man, a rancher named Wade Everett, saw beyond the dress to the person beneath. He defended my dignity when I could not defend it myself. He gave me not just employment, but respect, kindness, and eventually, his heart. This is the story of how one moment of compassion changed everything, how love found me when I least expected it, and how two people built a life together that exceeded all my dreams. This is the story of us. The journal chronicled every important moment, every small joy and major triumph, preserving their love story for generations who would never meet them but would know their legacy. It told of hardship overcome, of love that endured, of a partnership built on mutual respect and deep affection. It was a testament to the truth that genuine goodness, true compassion, and real love can transform lives in ways both profound and lasting. The sun set over the Double E Ranch as it had countless times before, painting the sky in brilliant colors, illuminating the mountains and valley in golden light. And though Wade and Margaret were gone, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the place they had built together, living on in the children and grandchildren who carried their names and their values forward into the future. It had all started with a worn-out dress, with cruel laughter, and with one man's decision to stand up for what was right. From that single moment of integrity and kindness had grown a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that flourished, and a legacy that would endure for generations. In the end, that was what mattered most, not the hardships they had faced or the challenges they had overcome, but the love they had shared and the lives they had touched along the way. The story of Margaret and Wade Everett became part of Granite's history, told to newcomers and remembered by old-timers, a reminder that how we treat people in their moments of vulnerability reveals our true character, and that genuine love, built on a foundation of respect and kindness, can weather any storm and create something beautiful that lasts long after we are gone.